But we got to question this idea of reliability, or I'll use the term quite often, resilience in a supply chain. And if you've been following Harvard Business Review or McKinsey, or Wall Street Journal, there's been article after article about how you just can't have both. How can you have cost effectiveness and resiliency in the supply chain? So hopefully I can propose a model that'll get us moving in that direction. So what the premise is, the hypothesis is, are there lessons that supply chains can adapt from high-risk operations? And on the right side, you can read my definition of reliability at your leisure. And I'm taking it from MIT. There's two folks at MIT that if you're in the world of resilience and supply chains and risk management, I'd highly recommend. And one is David Simchi-Levy, and he's written several books on the supply chain and operations. And the other one is a guy named Yossi Sheffi, and he's sort of the guru of resilience right now. Tons of research, tons of data. It's a data-driven sort of approach. But they're the ones that are sort of setting us up for resilience in the supply chain. So by background, I'm the weirdest guy to get into this mix as possible, because by background, I'm a fighter pilot and I'm a systems analyst. So you mash those two things up and all you get are a whole bunch of questions. So I'll pretend I'm walking into a supply chain convention and my knowledge of practical supply chain application is relatively limited. I've usually been a consumer of supply chains as a project or a program manager or an operations manager running aircraft repair and overhaul facilities. But so if you started asking me about the SCORE model, I'd be a dog watching television. I'd know something was going on, but I wouldn't have a clue. So if you drill me on the details, you'll have a lot of fun, because we can unveil my ignorance, which is very common. So what I want to get out of this tonight is a model that you can begin, that's been proven in at least one application. So it's been proven in one application, but a model you can begin working with to systemically approach the creation of resilience within a supply chain. So I'm going to start with the first diagram or picture. And in the upper left-hand corner, it said trade-offs, responsiveness versus efficiency. It comes from a 2012 book by Simchi-Levy. And what he said was, and it's kind of the classic efficiency curve upside down. And what he said was, hey, if you run a fantastic operation, and he included supply chains as embedded in operations, and logistics and procurement and all that was sort of mashed up in this system of operations, and project management, program management, product development, everything fell under operations except marketing. And what he said was, in order for us to really succeed in our organizational effectiveness, we have to create a strategy that drives us towards lower cost and more rapid response time. And interestingly enough, he said that current strategy has to be focused on quality. The higher the quality, the more responsive we can be and the more efficient we could be, which sort of at the time was 10, 15 years ago, was working in the opposite direction, because we had this cost focus, drive down cost. But that was his premise. Over the next right, it says managing the unexpected. This has to do with a topic known as high reliability organizations. And those types of organizations are commonly captured in nuclear power plants, some hospital emergency rooms, air traffic control centers, aircraft carriers, those types of organizations that cannot fail. Because if they fail in any way, they're tightly coupled and they rapidly unravel. They just kind of spring apart, sort of like a golf ball. When you open up a golf ball, just kind of all the rubber inside just kind of unravels. So when I refer to high reliability organizations, it's how do we manage the unexpected? And you guys in the daily grind of a supply chain right now are probably just going, oh man, that's my daily life, is the unexpected. Now, when I refer to the book, I'll probably use Weick, W-E-I-C-K, for Carl Weick, because he's the father of this concept, the high reliability organization. And his co-author, Sutcliffe, comes from healthcare. So it's got a healthcare emphasis, but they looked at a whole bunch of organizations. It's research-based. It's not intuitive. It's data-driven. And so they said, what do those great organizations go? So high reliability organizations sets the stage. Here's what we gotta be. Now the next one down is called, and it's a Welsh word, Cynefin. And it comes from a guy named David Snowden, who was an analyst and consultant at IBM in the 1990s. Welsh word Cynefin means habitat. You and I would call it situational awareness. He said, you gotta know your situation, because that's what's the leadership role is: know the situation, determine the management system in order to function within that situation. And I got to meet him at a conference once back in the early 2000s, and I said, why do you use the Welsh word Cynefin? Why don't you use situational awareness or sense making or an American word? And he's Welsh, and he was kind of funny. He just said, well, everything is an American idea. Even if it isn't American, you guys grab it and claim it, and all of it suddenly becomes yours, so I can keep this. And so even though it's Cynefin, it stands, Cynefin is sense making, habitat, situational awareness, the situation we find ourselves in. So we take the framework of a high reliability organization, we take leadership decision making. Now we need a managerial system that functions in chaos. It's designed to work within an adaptive, complex structure. And the Sutherlands, Jeff Sutherland and his son, JJ Sutherland, have sort of packaged, they didn't necessarily create it, it's been around for a while, that they packaged this idea of Scrum. Scrum is in a rugby team. We move down the field as an autonomous work group. So rather than doing the traditional, I'm going to use Six Sigma here, so I apologize for the lean acolytes that hate Six Sigma, but define, measure, analyze, improve, control, the DMAIC model, which is very gated and very sequential, like a relay race. What Sutherlands have said is, hey, forget that, just get into a Scrum and work as an autonomous team and do all the work going down the field. Now, if I did a flashback to my early days, I would have called it concurrent engineering, but that's the new word is Scrum, just work it down the field. Very common in software engineering. That's where it started from. It's since sort of morphed into everything, and you can find it in entertainment, you can find it in finance. So we've got high reliability organizing, leadership making sense of the situation with Cynefin, telling us to manage our projects with Scrum so that we can meet Yossi Sheffi's idea of how to manage for the new abnormal. If you haven't read this book, it'll rock your world, because he wrote it in 2021-ish, and it's a year and a half old right now. But he just, I mean, he laid out everything that we had seen in the early stages of 2020, as far as operations, supply chain. You know, how come right now Starbucks can't get coffee cups, and you can't get baby formula at Bonds. You have to dig around in some mom and pop grocery store to end up finding baby formula. And he laid out why all of this is going on, but he left us hanging. He never said, here's a managerial system that leaders can use to establish reliability. So we get reliability, we're going to have that strategy that gives us better response time at a lower cost. Let me make my case now. Have I thrown anybody off? Anybody need me to repeat anything, or just holler out? So there's my home on the right side, USS Carl Vinson. Big old slab of steel in the middle of the ocean with 50, 60 airplanes parked on the flight deck. It can operate like San Francisco International Airport, launch and recover more airplanes than just about any other airport in the world. Self-contained, and it is the archetype, the model for a high reliability organization. Because if any part of that system unravels, the entire system unravels. Somebody forgets and loses a tool, you got to stop the operation until you find the tool. Somebody forgets to maintain an airplane properly. It ends up going in the water, and then you spend days looking for recovering the airplane and the pilot. all those sorts of things are part of what makes a high reliability organization. So the research started on this, and I was part of it way back in the 80s. So I'm dating myself big time. So, and believe it or not, it was on the USS Carl Vinson. Kind of amazing. Didn't even know that. I didn't know it until I just thought of it. So way back in the 80s, which shows how long these things have been around. And so the other part, my part was not running this thing necessarily. I had a small part in it, but in the lower left corner was my airplane. But the entire thing was run as a system called human systems integration, which is my academic background or my theoretical background, if you will, which you never thought of a supply chain, or you never thought of project management. You never thought of users or software development. All you thought of was the way the human and the entire system came together, because you were always so afraid of optimizing one at the expense of the other. So from an academic experience sort of framework, and I know it seems strange because you guys are taking advice from a pilot. And by the way, never take financial advice from a pilot. Never take financial advice from a pilot. But this is the flow. My experiences in high reliability organizing, but I know the processes, procedures, checklists of standard operating procedures being a pilot, in the integration that brings us to the entire system. Now my research focus for the last year and a half, 2 years, I go, how come organizations that are using Scrum aren't having problems during the, I mean, they have problems, but they're surviving, they're thriving sometimes in incredibly complex socio-technical systems. And I'm really interested in how I can take this and help my university, Point Loma Nazarene University, where I teach, work a little bit better. Because by background, I'm a professor like Mandy is. And so what we look at all the time is how can we take our research and plow it back into the university so Point Loma Nazarene University gets better. And so I'm looking at this and saying, you guys are in the weeds trying to make this stuff work. What management system will help you work through the complex details that you're facing in supply chains and general operations and project management and all the stuff we need to get our organizations thriving? So bottom line up front, bluff, what I hope to give you tonight is a reliability model for a supply chain, because I want to study the reliability of high performing systems, a system of reliability, which is the HRO from WIKE, establish a leadership framework for accountability, which is Knuffen, determine managerial processes for roles and responsibility, Snowden, give you a case study from Sutherland, and turn it all back into that reliability model for a supply chain. And like the great one, W.E. Deming told us, it's a cycle. You never stop. You're always building to the next step. So if you ask, Mandy's probably grading me for learning objectives. Mandy, here are our learning objectives. So I got to have two assumptions here. We got to have a fear-free environment. So if your organization, pressures folks, it doesn't use balanced metrics, is really, primarily cost-driven, it's just always ground and pound with the vendors, creating fear and uncertainty and a lack of trust, I don't think this will work. But if you can drive fear out of the organization, like Deming said in his book, The New Economics, then it's going to work. It's got a chance to work. And we have to couple it with this Japanese term, I'm sure as a supply chain professional, you've heard it before, Kaizen, the pursuit of continuous improvement. The only thing I'll throw at you that if I brought Kaizen and mentioned it to a high reliability organization, they would look at me and say, why do I want to continuously improve? That's dumb. I want to learn. And you would say, well, isn't it the same thing? No, I'm going to learn. And because I learn, I continuously improve. But I want to learn the right stuff. I want to learn it effectively. So you're going to hear me, if I fall back into my high reliability organizing mindset, instead of saying learning, I should say continuous improvement. But odds are I'll say learning, because the focus is on learning. Everything in a high reliability organization is a continuous cycle of learning. As Dr. Deming said, you plan, you do, you study, you act. That continuous cycle of plan, do, study, act. which, here's a plug. If you want to really master it, here's a great book from Mike Osterling, Value Stream Mapping, that is grounded in Plan, Do, Study, Act. I'm serious. It's a great book.
All right, I owe you $5, man.
Okay. Or no, you can pay me in stone. You can pay me in stone. So we have defining a high reliability organization. So I'll pause for a second because you guys will read better than I can talk, and just read it through. Now, if you benchmark, if you're saying, well, I want to find one in San Diego, I could just go learn from. Over COVID, I've been watching, just because so many of our students in our MBA program at Point Loma Nazarene come from Sharp. I've just been so impressed with Sharp's integration of high reliability organizing. And when I've talked to the staff there and their director of continuous improvement, she's always saying, hey, we do it because all we want to do is be a high reliability organization. Other hospitals have not followed Sharp's path. So I'm wondering, just in case you're in the benchmarking mode to see what a high reliability organization will do, I think there's value in studying Sharp Healthcare. And you can find all their HRO stuff and contact stuff on the web. So McKinsey did a deep dive into this, and I can get you the article if you want. And what they said is, hey, companies, organizations, and this was in the throes of COVID, the high reliability organizations have three fundamental business practices. Well, accountability is run from the top. They own the leadership, and then they implement robust reliability process, and they clearly establish roles and responsibility. So when this first came out, I said, how do I set this up inside my model? Now, to jump to the storyline, that's where I ended up with this project management system known as Scrum from the Sutherlands, because the entire thing is set with accountability from the top, reliable processes, clearly defined roles and responsibilities, building a great team. So I'll let you read the left side as you go through it, and just ask yourself, as you're reading it, does a supply chain fit the criteria for high reliability operations organization, according to Wyke and Sutcliffe? And their prototype outside of the military is our wildland firefighters, because they're right on the edge. They have absolutely no slack. They don't have any supply chain. They're self-contained. They don't have the ability for command and control. It's not like everyone's carrying around an iPad. So their idea is, for an organization to survive, you got to be a lot more like a wildland firefighter than a Harvard MBA. So go ahead and look over it and just ask yourself, I mean, rhetorically, does my job fit this criteria? Will high reliability organizing assist me? A commonly asked question at this point when I talk and with my students is extreme hierarchical differentiation, the third one down. And that term hierarchical throws folks off. And they say, hey, aren't you talking about self-organizing teams? Yet you're talking about a hierarchy. In a sense, that word is incorrect, I would say, but I'm not going to argue with the two folks that created the system. But what should be there is, I say, instead of focusing on the hierarchy, look at clearly differentiated and defined. Because yes, there is, even in the most self-managed work teams, and hierarchy that could be composed of knowledge, or it could be composed of personality. But at the same time, what you want to do is focus on the differentiation and define coordination efforts because of roles and responsibilities. We know our job, we stay in our lane, not so as to create bureaucracy, but to hinder bureaucracy and to let folks do their work. And so, when we end up getting down to this idea and I start talking about the process and the workflow of Scrum, there are, oh, I'm sorry, question? Multiple decision makers. Any questions up to this point?
I got a question or a comment, maybe, Matt.
Sure.
If you can go back to that slide, I almost wonder if the question or part of the question is, does supply chain management require these criteria? Which I think in many cases the question is yes, and then the follow-up to that is, okay, where are we on this? Just as an easy one, high degree of accountability. So yeah, there should be high degree of accountability in supply chain management, but in my organization, is there?
It's a great point. And a lady named Amy Edmondson from Harvard said, hey, if you want to be a HRO, here is a cultural assessment. And so she put together, and this was back in the mid 2000s. It didn't have much juice at the time because it was HROs were not, as popular as they are now as the world unravels. But she did actually put that together. So a company could say, are we an HRO? Or a hospital could say, are we not an HRO? And then that was used when the Affordable Care Act rolled out, because one of the premises of the Affordable Care Act under President Obama and Speaker Pelosi back in the 2000s was every hospital has to be an HRO. So there is a, instrument that says it, because an awful lot of companies are like every other organization or assessment is, somewhere a 1 is ad hoc and a 5 is completely mature. And most organizations just naturally gravitate towards the 2.5 and sort of bounce around. So yeah, there is an assessment that would help an organization. If anybody's interested, I'll get it for you. And it's just a great way to say, hey, how do, and she made these terms that are sort of non-operational, very specific. Like when she talked about tight coupling, it was, hey, what are the dependencies for one thing to happen? How many dependencies have to occur? And then she gave a criteria. Well, at 1 dependency, it's no big deal. 5 dependencies, it's going to be a problem. If you got 10 dependencies, you're probably in a very tightly coupled system that'll unravel at the first stressor. So I hope I addressed the idea. And if anybody needs the instrument, just drop me an email, which is on the first slide, and I'd be glad to look it up. So we figure out where we're at, where we want to go to, in the gap. So we can close the gap.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is an HRO environment, so it seems like it's something that is mostly for like complex systems. I don't know if it solely ties with a complex system, or like, because when I think of supply chains, there's also like, okay, an example is like manufacturing, but you can have like a pretty simple manufacturing organization where it's like mostly technological rather than people, right? So then in that case, would an HRO environment not really be needed?
Well, I look at it this way. And I'll just start with the semiconductors. That anybody wrestling with semiconductors now, trying to find some for printed circuit boards somewhere in the world. But here we are with a $50 semiconductor, and we can't sell a $60,000 pickup truck. And we've been making trucks for what, like 100 years now. So I think even simple, and when we get to the Canoven framework, I'll expound on this. But I would say even simple can rapidly deteriorate to chaotic if we don't carefully manage the tightly coupled points. So let's take something as simple as Wells Fargo. They're a bank. Banks have been around forever. And because they forgot some of these principles, like tight coupling and a high degree of accountability, frequent feedback, compressed time restraints. Anybody remember, I think it was 2018-ish, Wells Fargo really got their in trouble because they created a management system which incentivized employees to focus on sales of new product, and the employees were worried about getting fired, fear, and then they were also worried about not meeting their quotas because the manager was pushing them towards the quotas. So all of a sudden, something is what I would call as simple as running a local branch of a major bank unraveled because some of these HRO principles were avoided, and the employees were either faking or falsifying records. And I think it cost them $8-10 billion in fines, maybe more, maybe more. I know it cost a couple CEOs their job. So I would say even in the simplest process, if we have these things that could exist, and hypercomplexity, is often defined as two people, because as soon as we bring two people into the equation, we become hyper complex. And so I would say even the simplest ones, if the impact is severe to your organization and causes a major disruption, you would benefit from HRO thinking. Did my argument sway you, or do you think I'm still full of BS?
No, it definitely makes sense.
No, you're lying. You think I'm full of BS. I can tell. I'm a professor. I know when students are lying to me. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but the idea is even the simplest can become the most confounding. I mean, how hard is it to make toilet paper? And how did the US, I mean, the first world of all first world countries, run out of toilet paper? That one I'll never figure out. We run out of toilet paper during a respiratory pandemic, only in America. So even the simplest can unravel quickly. And when I get to Canoven, I'll try to make that point a little bit clearer. So here's the principles, the foundation of high reliability organizing. This is straight from that Wyke and Sutcliffe book. So I would call this, on the 3 principles of anticipation, I would call it risk management. And the 2 principles of containment, I would call it risk response. So the 3 principles of anticipation: preoccupation with failure. Even the smallest, most inconsequential errors, it's a system of something that's wrong. You know, for you lean acolytes, it's the classic andon pull. Anything goes wrong, we're going to stop the system and figure out what's going on. So even if it's the smallest thing, like on that aircraft carrier flight deck, believe it or not, one 18-year-old sailor loses a screwdriver, the entire system stops until we find that screwdriver. Preoccupation with failure. And then guess what? If that sailor reported his or her mistake, absolutely zero blame, because they're rewarded because they lived within the system. They were preoccupied with failure. And guess what? Everything stops. Why'd you lose the tool? Was it a bad tool belt? Bad placement? Were you rushed? Bad management? What happened to it? Rapid root cause analysis. So even the smallest failure. Now in academia right now for the supply chain, that's the sense and respond. Are you sensing in the granular detail? You know, here's one I'll just throw out. I know nothing about it other than what I'm reading about in the Wall Street Journal, but it's just a question in the back of my mind. And maybe one of you guys can answer it. How come we keep piling crap into Long Beach? I mean, shouldn't somebody have said, hey, it looks like sensing the offloading of the cargo ships in Long Beach, it's supposed to take 2 days. It's taken a week. Why are we continuously pushing stuff through Long Beach? When I have asked that question to supply chain professionals, they go, well, it's long-term contract and it would cost too much to move it to Oakland and Seattle and all that kind of stuff. I said, but are you sensing it? I mean, was it something that you just allowed it to happen in the sense that you didn't have a system to sense? So preoccupying, always asking and saying, hey, what's supposed to take 2 days to offload is now going to a week. What's going on? Not saying that you come up with the answer or I'm the smartest guy in the world, but it just causes a pause in management to start thinking about what's going on. And that leads into the next one, sensitivity to operations. And here's an example of the difference between an HRO and a non-HRO. When you're going through leader development at a non-HRO, that leader development is focused at the strategic level. The folks that are moving, say to director or VP or senior VP level, they're the ones that get to go to the three-week programs at Darden about how to be an executive. That's a definitive example of a non-HRO because they're thinking about the strategic level, which is necessary, but not sufficient. Because an HRO is going to be promoting that sort of executive development at the frontline supervisor level. If you will, the folks, the individual contributor that's moving to their first supervisory or management position. That same 3-week effort's going into them because you're so sensitive to operations, you know the frontline supervisor, the face to the customer, is going to make or break what's going on. Reluctance to simplify always gets raises an eyebrow because we do simplify. We try to drive everything into a checklist, 17 steps, because HROs are so time compressed. But a reluctance to simplify, academicians or supply chain professionals or the scientists in the group may say that's like Occam's razor. Make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. Because what you're always trying to do is, hey, what we're trying to do is create the questions, not find the answers. So we simplify as much as we can to the point where we're saying, are we enough? Or what should we add? Or are we at the right spot? And so this is sort of the empirical method, scientific. You simplify until it just starts to test to move over from something like complicated to complex. And you say, okay, too much. I have to add some more, if you will, complexity to this. 2 principles of commitment. Resilience translates to learning, developing capabilities to detect, contain, and bounce back from events that do occur. So as soon as it happens, it's a learning event. It's not work, it's learning. And deference to expertise. Push the decision-making down and around the person, the frontline person with the most experience and expertise at that point. HROs focus on expertise when in crisis, if you will, because experience is valuable, but experience is, if you will, is translated to knowledge. Expertise translates to results in the HR world. So expertise, you could have a 2-year employee that knows their job that the 30-year employee is going to give deference to because the expertise is there. They know their job better. In my old job as a fighter pilot, I could be a very senior fighter pilot, but I would always listen to somebody that was better. And that in that case was most other fighter pilots. So now here's this Canoven framework. So I'm going to start with the one that I have just witnessed at my local Vaughan supermarket for the last couple of years. On the lower right-hand corner, it says collapse from the complicated, the sudden and anticipated drop into chaos from apparent security. So the Vaughns in Escondido, one of the Vaughns in Escondido, went from toilet paper on March 1st, 2020, to no toilet paper on March 2nd, 2020. And when we began, I know the store manager, so I was talking to her and I just said, what happened? And she just said, I don't know. We did our standard processes. We had our ordering systems. You know, previous forecasts told us how much toilet paper we were going to use. The vendors didn't have any problems. They didn't see any problems. It's just all of a sudden, you went from the simple, where we could sense what's going on, put it into a category like economic ordering quantity, push the button on a computer and respond. And that was best practice. But because a little bit of complacency set in, they weren't sensing and responding rapidly enough. All of a sudden, they went into chaos, where they're just scrambling to get, like everybody was at the time, to get toilet paper. And it was a novel experience. Now, they would generally find toilet paper and they'd restock at night. And us folks would run in and grab 40 rolls in the morning or whatever we were limited to. And you saw this with bleach and you saw it with rice and canned beans and all those sorts of things. But it was this collapse from from simple into chaotic. And people say, well, that was complacency. Because in Snowden's world, for Canoven, leaders should be always working the system in a complicated fashion. And when he says complicated, we sense, and then we think about it. We analyze what's going on. And we respond, not necessarily as categorized with a standard process. We respond, if you will, with an experiment, with thinking about it, asking other people, cross boundary. And this is good practice. And good management in the Canoven framework, a leader's framework for decision-making, is always trying, and I'll get to this in just a second, but it's like always trying to lean things down and experiment, not too much, not to put it into complexity, but sometimes it may go into it, but good practice. If you're a lean acolyte, this is where the rock comes from lean. Always lower the water level until the rock is exposed. So you lower the inventory level till the rock comes, and then you got to figure out what to do, how to navigate around the rock for the lean folks. But what it is you lower things until they're at the bare minimum. You set up a system, and then you try to drive as much slack out as possible so you know the performance of the system. That's complicated. Complex is emergent. It's something where we need autonomous teams, those frontline workers. And what they do in that sense is probe and collect data and try to learn. Where sense the data is being fed to us, probe, we got to go out and get the information and the data. Then we sense, figure out what to do, and respond. And usually it's with new systems, new processes, things we're developing on the fly. If you're have a military background, it's like called, you learn how to eat soup with a knife. You learn how to tie your shoes while you're running. It's that sort of idea. And then the lower left-hand corner is chaotic. And that's the classic command and control, separate, build time and space, figure out what's going on. So you can look at this and it's kind of an eye chart and it's confusing, but it's the leader's role of the organization. Here's where the accountability comes into it. And this is dated back in 1999. And what the leader's role is to take a look and say, what management system should we use? Well, simple checklists, processes, those standard stuff we do every day. Complicated. Well, it's a little bit tougher, but this is where we're going to have a system to that process that's flexible and adaptable. A commonly used example is, hey, when we're doing simple stuff, you've got a step 1, 2, 3, 4, no need to deviate. When we get complicated, you're going to have to deviate. So instead of a simple flow diagram, we're going to that swim lane. And so when you're in the complicated world, we're thinking about swim lanes, yeses or nos. Simple is linear flow, complicated, swim lane. Complex processes don't matter. The best thing we can do is begin to learn as rapidly as possible. Now, for those with a strategic background or have studied strategy, in the complex world, we've got to use this idea from the military. It's called Boyd's OODA loop. We got to get inside the decision time cycle. We got to observe, orient, decide, and act faster than the situation is developing. So in the complex world, we don't have time for standard processes. They wouldn't work anyway. We don't have time for a swim lane. We are building the process as we go. Lower left-hand one is the fire in the movie theater. Get out of the movie theater. Direct, command and control. So in the middle is disorder. And I usually call this, and for sake, lack of a better argument, is poor management. Because it's transitory, because a management influence comes in with a policy decision that throws disorder into a ordinary system. And the classic, here, let me ask, anybody in the group read the book, The Goal?
Yes.
Okay, so chapter 1 of The Goal, and you guys correct me if I don't get this right. Chapter 1 of The Goal begins, an old book, and it's a novel about an industrial plant, but the story basically has to do with systems thinking. So not chapter 1 of The Goal, it begins with the plant manager driving up and seeing the executive VP's car parked in a parking spot, his parking spot. And he walks in and the executive VP is screaming and yelling at the employees to ship this product to a customer who woke him up early that morning and said, hey, if you don't get that product into us today, we're going to drop the contract. So the VP did what good VPs do. They flew in, they shuffled things around, they created a whole bunch of variation, and the whole plant went and just basically unraveled because it was transitory, but it was inauthentic. It wasn't the way the system was designed to work, but guess what? The VP was practicing the management that he had been taught. So in the first chapter of The Goal, the lesson is, hey, don't move systems into disorder unless you think it all the way through. Because what happened in that manufacturing system is it went from that simple, complicated realm all of a sudden to complex. and they didn't have a management system able to handle this, the complexity and eventual chaos that resulted. So they shut down because they weren't thinking like an HRO, push it to the front line, that sort of stuff, as far as preoccupation with failure. If I do this, what could go wrong? So this is the theory. Let me go to the practice. So Snowden was asked back in 2003 during the SARS outbreak. Believe it or not, this isn't the first pandemic we faced in the modern era. The SARS outbreak sort of did the same sort of stuff. And just to know, by the way, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a link that'll bring you to a Wall Street Journal article from 2006. And it's from the Snowden IBM Wall Street Journal group predicting how supply chains would unravel with the next major supply chain pandemic. And they said, hey, if you use too much just in time, it's going to come back and bite you. If you don't use it rationally, if you don't understand that just in time means, use the right amount of inventory, not no inventory. So it's sort of prescient. It's an interesting article to read. But around that time, he was asked and said, okay, well, it's great. You've got all this theory. You're a smart guy. You understand what a high reliability organization is supposed to do, because he focused on high reliability organizations as the archetype of what to aspire to. And they said, hey, you know the Cynefin framework and how leaders in a high reliability organization manage the management of the system. Now give us some actionable operational principles we can apply. And so what he came up with, and he said, okay, clear, in the lower right-hand corner, he said, let's call it clear. And he said, that's best practice. That's your checklist. That's standard operating procedures. That's the stuff we do every day that works. So if we're in a simple environment, no outside stressors, our supply chain's working, we're not sensing and responding anything that's going to create problems, we're looking at it, and it's just, we're running in and out. I shouldn't say that, because in and out it's going to become pretty chaotic. But we've got a secure supply chain. We have a stable labor environment. We have everything that is supposed to be in a first world country working the way it's supposed to work. But he said, rarely does that happen. And we aren't sensing and responding enough. And so if you're clear in its best practice and anything happens and you continue to pump energy into that best practice, I'm just going to keep ordering more stuff. That's what the checklist says. You're immediately going to descend over to chaos. He said that's the most rapid, if you will, unwinding of a system, is trying to use that checklist when it just doesn't work anymore. And for those of you that are working for some sort of supply chain cert, I'm sure you're thinking about this idea of a bullwhip effect and how to answer questions about a bullwhip effect. But clear best practice leads into the chaos of the bullwhip effect. So Snowden studied systems, and he said, hey, most good systems, the Toyota production system, the Southwest Airlines system, the Apple supply chain system, lives in the complicated area. And it's repetitive good practice, best standard practice, best standard work, that type of thing. But it's got a system, and he said most of those companies are using some version of lean. And so they're using the elements of either Deming or Duran or the Toyota production system. They're using something like TQM, those sorts of ideas that fit the company culture to deal with the complicated situation. And they're always trying to make everything both more effective and efficient. They're trying to drive it down along that trade-off curve to give better response, faster delivery, higher quality, while at the same time keeping the cost down. So he said those kind of companies live in the complicated area. They're always testing. And you could say, well, how can I do that in my company? Perhaps a simulation, perhaps training where you say, okay, what are you going to do if the supplier goes offline? It could be something along the lines of, hey, what are we going to do if just take it out? We have to reshuffle the team and we lose two or three key team members. It's that contingency planning. It's really in-depth risk management, but taking it from risk management fully through the failure mode effects, where you're trying to figure out what could fail and then what are we going to do about it? Do we have a plan in place? So that's the sweet spot for complicated. And if we're doing it right, we're going to continuously push us over into the complex, where we uncover, I'm sorry, we uncover unique situations. And in a sense, it's experimentation in that complex. We've not stressed the system, we've experimented with the system, we're managing it, and we end up in this more complex environment where we could say, oh, let's lower the inventory. Oh, wait, we're out of the Kanban bins or the blue bins. And so we're out. So what should we do? Okay, we got to think on our feet. And that's, he said, okay, well, we understand what lean is. It's based on the Toyota production system. So now on the left side, it says sweet spot for agile. Agile, developed in the 1990s, is a project management philosophy. And you can Google it. It's called the Agile Manifesto. And there's 12 principles. The agile bottom line is people over processes, customers over contracts. We embrace change. We love change because it's a learning opportunity. We look at work as learning, not work as problem solving. We always think about the system, and we do it in team format. Very egalitarian. We take away the roles and titles and say, and although there still are tons of roles and titles and jargon, but what we want to focus on is the emergent team. And we want to simplify and clarify so we can respond quickly. And some of the elements of an agile system are constant communication with things like daily stand-up meetings, morning and night, constant review and feedback. And there's fancy terms, but basically in the morning, you ask 4 questions. What do we intend to do? What are we going to do? In the sense of what could be the roadblockers? What could hinder us? What are we going to learn today? What is the learning objective for today? And at the end of the day, every day we ask 4 questions. What did we intend to do? What did we do? Why the gap? What are we going to plow back in for tomorrow? So sweet spot for agile, simple systems, visible management with things like, you know, if you like Kanban boards or, you know, stand-up meetings around, you know, Toyota term is Obaya, if you like those sorts of things. That's what agile is all about. Visible, self-managed work teams with continuous cycles of learning. Because over on the left side, Sheffy said, hey, supply chains and COVID, we got to change the way we're managing, and we need unique emergent management. Because for resilience, it's no longer better, faster, cheaper. It's yes, you need it better, faster, cheaper. And only resilience will give us that. Focus on the quality, we'll get the speed, drive down the cost. And his business case is quality is going to lead to speed, which will drive down the cost. Because we get flow through the system, it's going to reduce inventory, all those sorts of things. So that's the Canoven said, the boss in Canoven said, well, okay, you're putting me on the spot. Here's how I suggest you go about doing it. Checklists in the lower right-hand corner, lean thinking and systems for complicated, repetitive good practice. Live in the world of lean. Don't fall back into the clear best practice. Always think lean. And then move over to agile project management when things start to unravel and they become unique. And chaos will result if you're not using this balancing thing, according to Canoven. So what was the one? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to be clear. So these 4 different systems, they're completely distinct, right? Or you can, I think you said you can transition from one to the other over time, but you can't really combine them because then that would be that middle confusion part, right?
Yeah, you're mismanaging theoretically in the Canoven framework.
Okay.
But I mean, we all know that, you know, you're going to have back office stuff that's using clear best practice. You're going to have front office stuff that's sweet spot for agile. So inside one corporation, I mean, inside one 10-person project team, you could have different folks working with different management frameworks as directed by leadership. Make sense? And the classic example is Amazon, because they're using things like clear best practice checklists as far as pick, pack, and ship in their warehouse facilities, but they're bouncing around in agile when they're doing things like their web services and new product development. So one organization can have a lot of stuff going on inside, but if you're managing a project team, you're always thinking about what's the right management system for my project team. In academia, you'll always hear this called as embracing ambiguity or the ambidextrous organization.
Can I ask a quick question, Matt, before you move on?
You can ask a slow question.
Okay. So I'm looking at, like, say we're a lean organization, we like to operate in, what you call the complicated realm. And then, we're in that groove, but then COVID hits and now we're in a world where we need to become emergent and we need to become more agile. How can we transition quickly from complicated to complex without descending into chaos? Is that possible?
Well, it was for at least one company, and there's only been one case study formal case study, written case study that did it. And the way they did it is, in a sense, they were one part of the organization had embraced Scrum. So there was the institutional knowledge, and I'll get to that in just a second. So when chaos hit in the case study, the chaos is in the form of semiconductors. So the chaos hit in the form of semiconductors. The leadership team said that problem has to be addressed with this management framework, because they had been a lean company working in the complicated area. All of a sudden they couldn't get semiconductors. And so what they did is, hey, supply chain solutions, get with enterprise resource planning, which was in the agile world, and have them bring you up to speed on how to manage this in that agile framework. So in a sense, they had the capability already embedded in the system, and leadership said, shift your management system, and they were able to do it quickly.
That's nice, but that's also ideal, but thanks for answering my question.
People would say it's ideal, but in the case study and in an HRO, it's normal, because you have the capacity to rapidly reconfigure your management system because of those things like consistent training. Now, the management system, well, it's going to look complex, but it's very simple. To go from lean to agile is a set of roles, meetings, and deliverables, really, as far as, and just trust in the team. So if you have the capability, if you have the core of a strong team, talented individuals, the system just becomes the process, if you will. Just going from a lean process of, we're going to take our time and do a value stream map, to switch it to agile, where we're going to do something I'll show you in a second called a sprint. So in an HRO, I would say that brings up a great point. I hadn't phrased it in this way before. That's the beauty of an HRO. You're gonna pivot on the fly. You're gonna learn to eat soup with your knife. You're gonna tie your strings, tie your shoes while you're running, because you have that embedded capability because of strong teams to go from the one to the other. It's because you need teams in lean, you need teams in agile. So that was the key for the case study, and for by Sharp Healthcare.
Matt?
Yes, please.
So a lot of companies, repetitive processes, take Amazon or whoever. So they call themselves lean, or they've got a lot of they're a lean operation. They've got best practices checklists. The work that they do hour in, hour out is standard work, and it's easy to duplicate or standardize. But then where does, like, these companies that have a daily management system where they say those things that you said about agile? So, the end of the shift and beginning of the shift huddles, where they say, what was the plan? How did we do? What kind of problems did we have? What's our response, or what's our reaction to get the support so we don't have that same problem tomorrow? Is that kind of in this model, is that kind of a blend between, hey, the hour by hour stuff is clear, the daily check-in and reaction is kind of that agile model? Yeah,
it's the process of agile builds the team, because it's a process designed to build the team. And again, to go back to the point on learning, the objective in lean, I would argue the objective for lean is to learn, but lean lacks the formal standardization of a learning process, I would argue, because you say, well, lean thinking is Kaizen, but then that's the philosophy. But how do you do Kaizen? Well, we do Kaizen when we have a problem. So it's sort of this mashup. I guess that would be the term I would use, that if you're operating in the conveyor belt area, you're sort of a mashup of these two philosophies because they meld well. Agile is drawn from lean and the agile philosophy, but it's a switch in just the way you manage your daily event. Now, everybody doesn't do it. Like the whole company of John Deere, which is the case study I'll show you, did not go into this agile world. Only Supply Chain Solutions in the information technology group, because they were the ones that were under stress. The rest of the HR department continued to work in their clear best practice or complicated areas based on what the management system was. So it's very targeted based on which section of the system is unraveling. Again, the core that goes back to the HRO principle is emergent teams or self-autonomous teams that can work autonomously. Don't let me freak you out. So Scrum, rugby, moving down the field. So most of us live in a world that's semi-lean. We want to drive waste out of the system. We want high quality. We're looking for the 7 or 8 or 9 types of waste, the 5 or 6 S's, those sorts of things. We're thinking about the supply chain and always looking for blockages and where we can create some improvement efforts. And we know the language. So you're going to see a lot of the same language here. So Scrum was developed because the person that developed Scrum said lean is too slow and lean is too frustrating. Lean is too bureaucratic. We got to go back to the roots of how to create value for customers. So there's a couple differences in this system when you're making that transition from lean to agile based on the situation that seems strange, because lean is very focused on time. But instead of saying how much time will it take, Scrum turns that around a little bit and says, how much are we going to get done in this unit time? So the fundamental principle behind Scrum is we have this idea called a sprint. And a sprint can be a day, it's usually 2 weeks, because in that sprint, we want to see how fast we learn. So it fits right into the HRO system, which is learning. Snowden said, hey, if you're working in the world of high complexity, you got to use agile. And so this is an agile framework focused on learning that has speed embedded as a priority. And so is quality. And I'll get to that just in a second. So it's supposed to be simple, but it looks pretty complex the first time you stare at it. And so this is just an intro. Scrum Inc. is like the mother source. It's the holy grail. They're the folks that developed it. They're the folks that think about it. Their website is scrum.org. They wrote the books that we talked about it. But what they said is, hey, in traditional management, we usually have a product owner or a project manager, a program manager, a director. Now, when we have to work in the world of time, something that's temporary, unique, we don't really know when the end of the end is going to be. And there's so much uncertainty that goes on to it. We have to differentiate the roles. We have to have a product owner who's focused on value creation for a customer that looks at things like vision and priority. So in the left-hand side, 3 roles, we have a product owner that's thinking about the deliverable. What am I going to give to the customer? We have a Scrum Master who's thinking nothing about the team and how we can learn. Scrum Masters thinking continuous improvement, always learning. Product owners thinking about the customer. Now, it's not to say the product owner doesn't think about the team or the Scrum Master doesn't think about the customer, but the roles are clearly defined. The Scrum Master is the servant leader, if you will. The Scrum Master is the team builder. He or she is the one that facilitates conflict resolution. They're primarily focused on the human factor. The product owner is thinking about the product, the specs, those types of things. And then on the lower left, and this is sort of a nod towards the roots of Agile, and it came from the software industry, but instead of calling it a team, for some reason, just to hold true to their roots, they call it developers. And they look at the developers as knowledge workers. And this system is used in hardware, it's used in supply chains, it's used in many different spots. So they're not necessarily developers, although you would say they would be developers for things like ERP or IT implementation, those types of things. But what they are is knowledge workers, and they have a high level of expertise, back to the HRO, and their focus is on the quality of their product. It's strange because in many organizations, you'll have something like quality assurance. And this is where they borrow from Lean. The developers are the quality team. So they're creating it and they're delivering it, which creates a lot of friction with companies that like to inspect things, because they say, well, you don't need to inspect anything because we wouldn't be doing it if the work wasn't good. And we stop the work because we believe in that principle of stopping in order to learn. So developers are also the quality folks. So 3 roles. And you could say, well, how do you scale this up? It's called Scrum at Scale, and you just build multiple teams. Ideal size, by the way, is 6 to 9 people, because they found that 6 to 9 people that work well within the Scrum system are doing the work of 100 people that are working outside of the Scrum system. And that's research. It's always the Scrum motto is we're going to get twice the work done in half the time with half the people. So small teams, 2 pizza rule, 6 to 9 people. Product owner, focused on the customer. Scrum master, focused on the people. Autonomous team that develops the work on their own within limits. Those are the roles. Now, in some places, these events are called meetings, but we set things up for a time. We say, okay, product owner is going to say, we've got a backlog. It's a checklist. It's how many things we got to get done. It's a to-do list. In traditional project management, you call it a work breakdown structure. It's a whole list sequentially laid out of stuff we got to get done. And so, if you're doing something like an aircraft repair and overhaul, and you're going to use the Scrum management method, you got 300 things you got to get done. Now, the product owner initially develops the product backlog, the to-do list, based on what value for the customer is, because he or she is embedded with the customers. And they're always asking, what do you get the most value out of? What can we produce for you? Because we got 2 weeks coming up, and we're going to do this thing called a sprint. And at the end of 2 weeks, we want to give you an increment of value. So I'm going to use my aircraft repair and overhaul example. And if I were talking to my customers, they're always hot on the engines. So I would say, what can I give you at the end of 2 weeks that you need to fly that airplane? Get the engine so I have certainty on my engines. So get the engines done. So our focus would be, okay, we're going to create a product backlog focused on engines initially. That translates into something called a sprint planning, and then into a sprint backlog. The sprint is 2 weeks, a month. It depends on your product. It could be 2 days. It's whatever cycle of value you want to create for your customer. So you take your huge backlog, you turn it into backlog refinement, and turn it into sprint backlog. Then product owner, Scrum master meets with the team. And the team takes over and said, let's plan our work. This is where the autonomous team comes in. Doesn't mean they do it in a vacuum. Product owner still has say, Scrum master has say, but the team itself that's going to do the work begins to rack and stack who should do the work, who creates the best value. Very similar, if you're an old schooler, you'll say, well, Matt, all you're doing is talking about concurrent engineering from back in the 70s. Like Pfizer just used to roll out the COVID vaccine was this idea, but all their engineers called it concurrent engineering. Everybody in a room figuring out how we could do it the best. That translates into that daily Scrum idea. So you got your sprint plan. Okay, we're going into our sprint every morning and every night. Here's what we're going to produce. Commonly asked question is, are you in a matrixed organization when you do this? So you have your product team split up doing half a day with their line manager and half a day. No, it's designed to be done by the people doing the work. So if you got a supply chain issue, you're managing the supply chain. It's just a daily Scrum or daily event. So the people are doing the work. It wouldn't be matrixed in that way. Doesn't say you can't bring people in if you need finance expertise. Doesn't mean you can't change your team dynamics based on what you need. But your daily Scrum starts out with that daily meeting and says, what are we going to do today? What could be our hindrances? Scrum master, here's the people problems we have. Product owner, here's the input from the customer we need. So you could say, well, that's got to be hours, but those of you doing stand-ups know you can bang those out 10, 15 minutes. So your daily scrum, you take a look and say, okay, where are we at? Most commonly used for those that like it are just yellow stickies on a board. There's really tons of software. There's Jira, there's Trello, there's Rike. There's tons of software that does it, but most scrum teams are putting yellow stickies on a board. Daily flow goes, here's what we're going to get done today. Then at the end of the day, we say, how much work did we get done? Say we had 10 things and we had a certain amount of customer value that we're going to put into it, and say, how much value did we create for our customer today? And you try to say, what rate of learning are we doing in our daily flow? Because everything's got some value to a customer. You tend to stay away from dollars, and just because that's a little too nebulous, but you're saying, hey, we're creating 50 points of value for a customer out of 100 by giving them the engines when they want. So the sprint's going to run for 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, no more than a month. At the end, customer comes in, customers, and they say, and it could be a focus group, and we say, okay, we're at the end of the scrum. It's time for us to do a retrospective. Now you're all going to see a familiar word below that, and that's Kaizen, because the retrospective is all about Kaizen. And you say, what could we have done to create a better process? Retrospective focuses on the work process. Did we give the customer what they wanted? And we talk about the workflow from the customer's view. And then over there, we have the sprint review, and that's where we talk about the product. Did we give them the increment? Here's a term, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is just an intro. Sprint review, we're talking about the product, and we're also talking about the velocity of our learning. A lot of folks, when they get into the world, they go, well, this is strange. I've got budgets, I've got customers, I've got earned value management. It's all coming together. It's so stressful. And you're telling me all we're worried about is the velocity of our learning? If we take care of the learning, how fast are we learning to do things? It takes care of all the rest. It doesn't mean that if you want to be the product owner and use your earned value management, it works. If you want to be the product owner and use the DMAIC process embedded in this, it works. So it's just, the idea is how fast are we learning? And then we go back through and we say, let's refine our backlog and take her into the next sprint. So what are we doing? This is called lightweight project management, by the way, because all we're worrying about are 3 artifacts, 3 reports. We got a to-do list, big wise, for a product backlog. We got a short-term sprint backlog. And then we got this product increment. We're defining something that's done for the customer. At the end of 2 weeks, we're going to hand them an engine. Won't be a whole airplane, but he or she can then do something and say, okay, you got an engine, we're good, because that takes a big worry off our mind. So next thing I need are the landing gear, because in their mind, they're building their airplane, so to speak. I'm using a bad example, but it fits, for at least that's the way I used to do it. So the idea with Scrum, egalitarian, take away the hierarchy, autonomous teams, daily focus on value creation, minimal meetings, and then minimal paperwork with the 3 artifacts or reports that you have to do. Generally, this is managed with a whiteboard and spreadsheets. Some people will use Jira, Trello, Rike, those types of things. But most folks are trying to keep it simple so the bureaucracy's out of there. For those that are in the lean world, a vast majority of Scrum projects use a Toyota A3. It's just an easy way to manage the project with a Toyota A3. But it comes down to that V word, velocity. How fast are we learning? Reason this is all coming together is it goes back up, and Canavan said, hey, lean's great, but when things start to unravel, we got to have autonomous teams. Why do we need autonomous teams? Because those are the folks that are going to have the expertise. They're committed to learning. They don't want to simplify. Operations is taking the lead. Always risk management. Just like the wildland firefighters do. I mean, if they can be out there with nothing but a shovel and put out a major fire pretty much on their own, you got a pretty good system. So this is not me. I am not claiming these numbers. On the left side is a link, so you can fact check me. If you go, Matt, I don't believe this works. I can also give you some Amazon and Tesla cases if you need them. They're video. They're run out of Colorado University. Their MBA department took a look at Amazon and Tesla during the crisis and tried to figure out why they did so well, and it came back to the Scrum framework. So John Deere hit the big, just like every other company did, when COVID hit and supply chain started to unravel and didn't have enough workers and all those sorts of things, they said, what department is working well? So they started thinking about Knuven. And they used a different term. If you read the case study, that they used a term called VUCA, VUCA, for volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous, which is sort of an American version of Knuven. And they said, hey, we're operating in this we're bouncing from complicated to complex regularly. We got to come up with a new way of doing this. So they knew that in that case, they were lean. They needed a faster way. They had to embed that OODA loop for speed because things were just coming too quickly. And so they already had a Scrum framework used in their IT department, and they had had great success with that. So they went to supply chain solutions and said, executives did, and said, in order for you to get inside this decision cycle, we've got to change our management system. So leadership used the Knuven frame to move them to a new management system. And they talk about it. It took about 2 weeks to get the meeting flow, to let go of the old habits, the things like, we've got to use Microsoft Project. You can't manage a project without Microsoft Project. It took them a while to figure out that they were no longer in operations. They were in project management, that they could still do all the things that good supply chain managers do, whether it's risk management or sensitivity analysis. They could still do that. It was just the way the people were doing the work, because they started to look at the supply chain rather than an operation as a project that was incremental and iterative. And yes, they still used value stream mapping, and they still used the DMAIC process at certain times, but they used it as part of the process. And these are the documented results. As far as time and delivery, you can read them as well as I can. The only one that's probably strange to a supply chain person is deploys, and that's shameless marketing, by the way, by the person that did the consulting at John Deere. Deploys is just how many iterations and increments they turned out. So that's basically the number of sprints that were held. That's measuring an activity, not an outcome. But you can see it and you can read it. The guy who wrote it is a stand-up guy. I know him. So he's not lying through it. These are real results, and the website comes up with a bunch of results. But what they did is the executives were smart enough to see that, hey, we got to figure out this transition. Standard stuff doesn't work, so we got to move. We got to learn. We got to continuously improve. So lean's not working. So what we need to do is change the management system. And went to Scrum, and the results are there. So as a wrap up, what's the model telling us? Well, in order to drive down both our cost and our response time, we got to start thinking in terms of resilience and learning, because only the human capital of the firm is going to create the learning, not the artificial intelligence, not the predictive analytics, only the human capital of the firm. And that's captured in this idea of high reliability organizing. The idea of what management framework is going to work is a leadership responsibility. That comes with Knuven. And as we live in the world we're in, the old stage gate DMAIC flow of thinking that the world is linear, if you will, has gone away. And we got to move to Scrum in this rapid learning cycle. And yes, it is all based on plan, do, study, act. Because the guy on the left side, Yossi Sheffi, said, hey, I don't know what to tell you guys, but whatever you're doing is not working. You need a new management system. And the one that has worked, at least in 3 instances, John Deere, Tesla, and Amazon, has been Scrum. And I'm sure in other locations, those are the only ones I know of that I've been able to uncover. So that ends my presentation, and I'm ready for slings and arrows. I like that picture. Anything I can help you with?
Matt, good stuff. Thanks for sharing. Can you put the link in the chat?
Oh, for the John Deere?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can do that. And this, by the way, is just a great website. The Scrum guys, they give everything away. They're just good folks. Well, I'm sure I say that good. They give everything away, but I bet they charge John Deere a whole bunch. For some reason, I can't get the link to paste in there. Well, if anybody else can copy the link off. Mike, I will get you the link.
Okay.
I
Yeah, because we
apologize.
can't click on your screen to get the link.
Well, let me see if this one works. I'm going to back out of screen share. Any other questions while I hack around? Well,
I'm sorry, go on.
oh, I'll get the slides and I'll get the link to you guys. Sorry, I just can't. For some reason, my Zoom's not allowing me to paste into the.
I just posted it for you, Matt, from the presentation you sent me earlier today.
Thank you so much.
John Deere. So Matt, I love the real world example. So you mentioned John Deere. I see Amazon and Tesla. I'm just curious, like at the scale, if you know from like the cases where Amazon and Tesla did it, like what the scope was of their application of this model.
You mean number of people?
Like maybe like what like I'm sure it wasn't like Amazon, but was like a certain division took it on or a certain
Amazon was focused on their implementation of a new robotic system during COVID into their warehouse facility. So it was company-wide, but specific to warehouses or distribution centers. I shouldn't say warehouses, distribution centers. Tesla was specific to the Model 3, their production line for the Model 3. It didn't move into, there's no indication in the case studies, it moved into the back office. So HR continued to work the way HR worked. It was the operational systems that had descended into that complexity.
Awesome. I'll look into that more. Thanks, Matt.
And here's an example, and it's not published, so I can't claim it. But Sharp Healthcare, when I was talking to the folks that did this type of work at Sharp Healthcare, and they didn't call it Scrum, they used agile principles, but they just said they didn't want the jargon. So their director of operational excellence, VP of operational excellence, said she didn't want to confuse the situations because the nurses and doctors were reluctant to grasp the new jargon. They had to get more people through their operating rooms. And so they knew they couldn't mess with the nurses and doctors because they're professionals. And, you know, if you come in and say, speed up the operation, nothing good is going to come with that. So when they asked the nurses and doctors, they said, well, it takes us 45 minutes to go from one operation to the next because we have to change over all this stuff. So it was the classic changeover problem. So they used it specifically in their operating changeover process. They put together what I would call a Scrum team with nurses and doctors and said, how can we do this transition more quickly? So their focus was in that transition point between operations. And then rumor has it, and I do not know this for a fact, but the Sharp people said they got the idea from Mayo Clinic. So I think the Mayo Clinic did it as well. A case study that's going to be forthcoming about this stuff it's coming from Harvard, and unfortunately they won't give me an advanced copy, but I asked them about it, and the folks that are working on it are looking at the way Pfizer created the COVID vaccine, which was Scrum-like. So those are the real world examples I can come up with.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. I'm looking forward to that case study as well. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a guy from Montana State named Dobek, who's really, he's a concurrent engineer. He's not a Scrum master or anything like that, but he's written about it, but it doesn't have the Scrum terminology. But Pfizer was telling Harvard that they're going to use it as a Scrum framework kind of case study. Anything else? If you're in Mandy's class, how about 5% extra credit if you ask me a good question? Throw me a good question. Oh, look, everybody's thinking 5%. Oh my Lord, what can I do? Now, Mandy's gonna kill
I have
me.
a question.
Oh, are you looking for your 5%?
I'm looking for 100%.
Okay.
So with Scrum, do they have like, are they like, is there a plan to make their like their framework of how they like basically how the resiliency of their supply chain management, how adaptive it is and everything? Are they like working towards making that more parsimonious over time?
Good word. And I'm a doctor. I should know that. What's parsimonious mean to you? I'm serious. I'm going. I want to put it in the right frame. How should I answer that?
So I guess parsimonious or parsimony, the theory of parsimony is that usually the simple answers are usually correct. I studied it in biology because I have a biology degree. So when we did taxonomy, is usually the right answer tends to be the simplest of answers without getting too complicated over time. So basically, like, is Scrum or like Scrum Inc. trying to make that simpler over time while making it in practice to solve complex complex questions?
Short answer, absolutely. Long answer, it's grounded in the field of systems theory, and they draw heavily from the life sciences. As the
Makes
folks,
sense.
as you hack around in the Scrum website and you read the books, they are a lot more, if you will, biologically oriented than they are silicon oriented. And what they're always focused on is that Occam's razor principle. Let's simplify and be sure that the answer is as easily operationable as possible, but no simpler. And so what they do is they try to come up with the best possible answer. And here's the beauty, and here's where it will fit into your life science framework. They never employ it. They experiment. And it could be, here's an example that is playing out real world of all places. And I apologize because it's dinner time and you guys are probably hungry. But Panera was having a terrible problem getting the customers to order quickly. And their average ordering time was 8 minutes per customer. And so you just think about the Panera chain with 2,000 some restaurants. And so their cash flow was sort of bound up in their customers. All their inventory, their customers were not flowing through the system. And their CEO wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal. He said, we had to start thinking about Panera as like a river or a stream with pools and eddies and currents. And we had to look at it as from an environmental or ecological perspective rather than a physical perspective. Because humans don't act like machines. We stand, we gawk. My mouth is hanging open when I'm at Panera trying to figure out whether I want the broccoli and cheese soup or a sandwich or whatever. And so we cause delays and variation. So he began to look at the problem from that life science perspective, but he then experimented. So he took the principles of Scrum and said, let's iterate, let's make something incremental. So they did one restaurant in the Boston area, and the CEO actually led this project. He did one restaurant in the Boston area and experimented with things like iPads on the wall and better signage and perhaps because they didn't have the space to expand for customers. And they were able in that one experiment to reduce the customer ordering time from 8 minutes to 1 minute. And you think, big deal, 7 minutes. But that cash flow was amazing. And you could just watch their earnings just jumped at the point they began to take that experiment and build it out. So yes, Scrum is grounded in science. It's the empirical method. We want to make it simple, but at the same time, we want to make it work.
Yeah. So basically, that's what I was thinking. That's why I was trying to get at, because the entire, like when you were presenting the entire time, like I just kept thinking like, just basically it's just trying to figure out complex solutions using Scrum, basically, right? So
and that's what the if you will, the guru of Scrum, Sutherland, he's not a business person, he's a scientist. And so he looks at the problems like a scientist would. Yeah,
so I always usually think like some of the complex questions usually have simple answers sort of thing. So like I was mostly thinking like, since you were like a pilot and everything, I mean, I was thinking of like how like NASA used like Euler's method to like reorbital entry in 69. And I was like, this is kind of like Scrum, using old.
When I first got into Scrum, I just thought I was flying an airplane. I mean, the same sort of thinking goes into it. It's very fluid. There's a lot of flow to it. It's not like you're managing anything. You're just describing flow of information throughout a system, if you will, which is tough because the companies have to let go of the bureaucracies, which is why it's got to be fear-based and I'm sorry, fear-free. You got to get rid of fear, and then it has to focus on learning, Kaizen. But yeah, excellent question. But yeah, Sutherland is a scientist, and he designed this as not as an engineer, but as a scientist. And Snowden with Cynefin is a scientist. He's not a business person or an engineer. He designed it as a scientist. Anything else?
If there's no more questions, shall I wind it up? You made us all hungry now talking about Panera.
I know. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I'd like to say thank you for that. Was a great presentation, Matt. I'm sure everyone's learned a lot. Someone just wants to be admitted. We're a bit late, but yes, and so it's been fantastic. Thank you very much for coming along and talking for us this evening. Yeah, and I'd just like to say you've got another one about risk management, another talk on February the 23rd about cyber security in supply chain. So if anyone's interested in that, I clicked on the events list earlier, too soon, if you want to do that. But you can also sign up for our mailing, which will tell you about what's coming up, which I've just posted there. So if you want to see what else is coming up, we've got some eco-sustainability talks in supply chain. We've started an initiative where we will be having talks every month about eco-sustainability and different topics within supply chain. So people might be interested in that as well. So yeah, if you want to go to the link earlier, the events link, or subscribe, then that would be fantastic. And thank you very much again, Matt. We really appreciate you coming along tonight.
No worries, my pleasure. If anybody wants a copy of the slides, just drop me an email.
Okay. That's great, thank you.
Well, thanks so much. I'll check out, and I'll take my chastisement from Mandy for saying things that weren't right. Thanks. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
and Mike,
everyone.
I'll link up with you on LinkedIn. Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.